Freezing experiments. The freezing experiments began in 1941, overseen by Luftwaffe doctors who wanted to prevent hypothermia among soldiers, especially those fighting on the Eastern Front. At Dachau and Auschwitz, prisoners, often captured Soviet troops, were chosen as unwilling test subjects. The aim was to understand how the human body reacted to extreme cold and how best to revive someone after life-threatening exposure. Sigmund Rasche and Ernst Holzlöhner directed the program. One method involved immersing prisoners in tanks of freezing water for up to 3 hours, sometimes while wearing German uniforms to test how effective the clothing was in preventing hypothermia. Others were left naked outdoors in sub-zero conditions, sometimes at temperatures as low as -6 degrees Celsius. These trials routinely pushed victims to the edge of life, and many never survived. Different rewarming methods were also compared, from hot baths to the extreme measure of placing semi-conscious victims in boiling water. The program also attempted to measure whether certain groups, such as Soviet prisoners, possessed greater natural resistance to cold. Holzlöhner was later captured by British forces. After interrogation, he reportedly took his own life, though the details of his death remain uncertain. Altitude experiments. In 1942, Rasche also led altitude experiments at Dachau, this time to study the limits of human survival at high altitudes. The Luftwaffe wanted data on how pilots might endure after bailing out at extreme heights without supplemental oxygen. Prisoners, mostly Poles and Russians, were confined in a low-pressure chamber that simulated altitudes of up to 68,000 feet. Many experienced violent decompression sickness, severe convulsions, and brain hemorrhages before dying. Some reports suggest Rasche carried out crude operations on the brains of survivors, while others were slowly deprived of oxygen so doctors could measure exactly how long it took for suffocation to occur. Heinrich Himmler personally ordered some of these trials, even requesting attempts to determine whether the deceased could be revived after death. In total, around 200 people were subjected to these high-altitude experiments, and roughly 80 died during the trials. Seawater experiments. By 1944, research turned towards seawater survival. Luftwaffe and naval officials wanted to know whether salt water could be made drinkable for pilots or sailors stranded at sea. At Dachau, doctors Hans Eppinger and Wilhelm Beigelberg oversaw the program using about 90 Roma prisoners as test subjects. These prisoners were denied food and fresh water and forced to live on nothing but seawater or chemically treated seawater for days. Victims quickly suffered from severe dehydration, cramps, hallucinations, and organ failure. Witnesses recalled desperate prisoners licking recently cleaned floors or wringing dirty rags in their mouths just to obtain a few drops of moisture. Many were left in critical condition. After the war, Beigelberg was convicted at the Nuremberg doctors' trial but released in 1951. In 1963, he was found dead in a stairwell. Eppinger committed suicide after Germany's defeat, reportedly to avoid testifying. Blood experiments. Blood experiments were another major category. Sigmund Rasche conducted clotting studies using a substance called polygal, a fiber compound made from beets and apples. He claimed it could reduce bleeding in surgery and battlefield injuries. To test this, prisoners were given polygal tablets and then deliberately wounded. Some were shot in the neck or chest, others were cut open without anesthesia, many bled to death. Rasche later published papers on polygal's supposed benefits, but concealed the fact that the research was carried out on concentration camp inmates. He even set up a factory to produce the substance, operated by forced labor. Meanwhile, at Auschwitz, Dr. Bruno Weber tested blood transfusion compatibility. Prisoners were injected with mismatched blood types, which triggered violent immune reactions, high fevers, and often death. Rasche's career collapsed in 1944 when he and his wife were exposed for faking claims of miraculous fertility by kidnapping or buying infants to stage multiple pregnancies. He was also accused of fraud, murder, and falsifying research. Arrested by the Gestapo, he was eventually executed at Dachau in 1945. Twin experiments. From 1943 to 1944, Josef Mengele carried out his infamous twin experiments at Auschwitz. His goal was to promote Nazi racial theories and increase the birth rate of Aryan twins. Twins were seen as the key to unlocking hereditary science, so Mengele studied them obsessively. Children were measured, photographed, and subjected to constant examinations. Mengele injected them with diseases, performed amputations, and attempted bizarre surgical procedures, such as joining twins to mimic conjoined siblings. He also tried to change eye color by injecting chemicals directly into the iris. Many children died under his care. Survivor accounts describe transfusions of blood between male and female twins, as well as experiments on their reproductive organs to study gender traits. Out of around 1,500 pairs of twins who passed through his laboratory, fewer than 200 survived. After the war, Mengele escaped to South America, living under false identities until he drowned off the coast of Brazil in 1979. Chemical experiments. Between 1939 and 1945, the Nazis conducted chemical experiments in multiple camps to test poisons, antidotes, and the effects of chemical warfare. Prisoners were exposed to mustard gas, which caused painful blisters, blindness, lung damage, and cancers. An estimated 27,000 people were affected by these chemical trials. At Buchenwald, victims were burned with phosphorus taken from incendiary bombs. At Natzweiler, around 50 prisoners were killed in phosgene gas experiments. Nerve agents such as tabun and sarin were also tested. Some prisoners were deliberately poisoned through food or injections. Others were shot with bullets coated in toxins. Doctors attempted to test ointments and treatments for these injuries, but most subjects either died in agony or suffered permanent disfigurement. These trials advanced no real medical science, but revealed the regime's willingness to use prisoners as expendable test material. Disease experiments. From 1942 onward, the Nazis conducted widespread disease experiments. The stated aim was to find vaccines and treatments for German troops, but the methods were lethal and cruel. At Ravensbrück, wounds were deliberately infected with bacteria such as tetanus or streptococcus to test the effectiveness of sulfonamide drugs. At Buchenwald, over 1,000 inmates were deliberately infected with typhus and scarlet fever to test vaccines. At Dachau, prisoners were exposed to malaria-carrying mosquitoes, and more than 1,200 were later treated with experimental drugs. Hundreds died from the disease itself or from toxic side effects of the treatments. These programs were supported by major pharmaceutical companies, which hoped to profit from breakthroughs. The scale became so large that SS officers complained about the constant demand for more prisoners. Ultimately, thousands were killed, and epidemics sometimes spread throughout the camps because of these deliberate infections. Sterilization experiments. Finally, sterilization experiments reflected Nazi racial policy at its core. From 1941 to 1945, doctors tested mass sterilization methods on prisoners, particularly Jews and Roma, as part of the plan to prevent these populations from reproducing. Techniques included high-dose X-ray radiation, chemical injections, and surgical removal of reproductive organs. Victims not only lost the ability to have children, but often suffered from severe burns, internal bleeding, and chronic pain. After procedures, organs were sometimes removed for further study. These trials built on the Nazis' earlier sterilization campaign, which had already targeted more than 400,000 people in Germany before the war. Doctors such as Karl Klauberg and Horst Schumann oversaw the concentration camp programs. Schumann was eventually tried in West Germany in the 1970s, while Klauberg was captured by Soviet forces and later rearrested in West Germany. Both men escaped full justice, one dying before trial, the other released early for health reasons.